Okay, I think we're good to get started. Welcome. And we're going to take a minute or two now just to do a little bit of an introduction, tell you about what the panel's about. In case you're unable to see the whole presentation on your screen right now, you can hover over the view options at the top of your screen and then choose zoom ratio and select fit to window, and that'll be a better view for you. Of course, everybody by this point is probably an expert in virtual meetings and Zoom, and you've attended countless numbers of these before. Hi, I'm Adam Bodiger. I'm Chief Marketing Officer at Galorath. Welcome to our January Lunch and Learn session. This is going to be a panel format entitled 6 Predictions and Insights for 2022, How COVID Will Affect Supply Chain, Program, and Project Costs. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to learn something new today. All of the lines have been placed on mute to avoid any background noise. If you have any questions or you need any help during the session, please use the chat function to speak with our support team. The chat button can be located by hovering your mouse over the bottom of the Zoom window, and that'll show you where it is. So if you have a question or need some technical support. Today's training is a collaboration between Galorath and the Society of Cost Engineers. Galorath is the leader in analytical program management, empowering analysts and organizational leaders to make complex business decisions with confidence through the use of predictive analytics on the web at galorath.com. The Society of Cost Engineers is the only free organization designed to promote the disciplines of cost engineering, controlling, and estimating. Society set up to promote standards and the exchange of best practices, and you could read more about them on the web at societyofcostengineers.com. Please stick around for the live Q&A session that we're going to be holding at the end of this. This is going to be your opportunity to ask questions of the panel and make this session specifically relevant to you, your programs, your projects, and get a little bit more out of today's Lunch and Learn session. We'll also be providing a link in the chat window to a 2-minute post-event evaluation survey and an opportunity to win a $100 Amazon gift card or have the money donated to charity if you're working for a government organization. So do spend 2 minutes after the session at the end. That's how we learn to be better and also to be more relevant to you in future sessions. If you know anybody else in your team or at your company right now who should be here and should be learning today, you can send them an instant message or Slack message or email. Send them over to galorath.live. That's GALORATH.live, and they can join us in progress. All handouts from this session, we don't really have any, but video and any collateral from this session is available after the session at galorath.live. We anticipate video of the session to be live on Friday, and we'll be sending out a reminder about that. Our next virtual Lunch and Learn session is going to be on February 16th, entitled Bias, Your Friend or Foe. 2 Ways Bias is Your Friend and 5 Ways Bias is Your Foe, featuring Galorath founder and CEO Dan Galorath. You can register for that at galorath.live. We talked about the video. And so today's format is it's got a roundtable panel featuring Jerry Collins from the Society of Cost Engineers as the moderator. And without further ado, let me introduce your panel this morning. So we have Jerry Collins, founder and CEO of the Society of Cost Engineers. He's going to be the moderator. And on the panelists, we have Keith Bolda he is the engineering group manager at General Motors. Professor Andrew Langridge, business development director, Ares Software Europe. Dale Martin, a cost analyst for NOAA. Doug Howarth, CEO of Hypernomics. Ross Rayburn, lifecycle affordability manager at Bell Flight and Textron. Dr. Christian Smart, Chief Scientist at Galorath, and Dan Galorath, founder and CEO of Galorath. So we've got an all-star team here today. Looking forward to taking your questions at the end when we open up the Q&A session. And without further ado, I will turn it over to our moderator. Jerry, take it away.
Thanks, Adam. Thanks for the great introduction. I'm going to start this with maybe a little bit of a personal twist on this. And Keith, maybe you're a good person to respond to this one, but personal story is around Thanksgiving timeframe, I was looking to get a truck, a brand new truck. And I found it very, very difficult to find one. I actually had to travel about 6 hours away to finally get the vehicle I was looking for. and at the right price. So kind of interested in learning from the panel. Do you think this is caused by material disruptions caused by COVID and or other economic and political type things going on in the world today? Keith, if you'd like to start that, that'd be great.
Okay. Well, I think it's a very good question. So I'll say yes to all of the above. It seems as though COVID is pretty much taking control over pretty much every aspect of our lives, and this is no different here, right? Most people, when you start talking about material shortages or supply chain, the first thing a lot of people think of is the microchips. And that has been a catalyst for a lot of heartburn for every OEM. And pretty much the solution that they've come up with, right, is the build shy approach. And again, pretty much all of them are taking the same approach. GM's no different in that regard. Leveraging your supply chain to be able to, deliver product on time is a key aspect of being profitable in automotive. And none of that's been lost on us during this time. Being able to offset, the headwinds that have come our way from COVID has been, the primary focus of General Motors as well as other OEMs for sure. But to answer your question specifically, planning ahead as you were, I guess, made you aware of a lot of the things that other people are just talking about on the news. And in your, for each of us, right, our own individual world is how we see things. And I had an experience as well recently where I have two vehicles that are going back. And what I did was I tried to find a dealer that would, work with me. And the dealer that I found actually had a couple extra vehicles that they ordered and they didn't have earmarked. And so I was able to find what I was looking for in that way. But, it isn't uncommon for people today to have to order things far in advance. I'm going to say 4 to 6 weeks is pretty common, I think, for most people. Mm-hmm. And again, it has everything to do with the chips. That's what's drawing, all of the angst on this issue for sure. The one, I guess, good aspect of it is if you are turning something in, they are actually giving you more money for your trade-ins. It makes things a little bit easier, but at the same time, it doesn't help you, facilitate your sale faster, right?
Right. Any of the other panel?
Yeah, we have an additional problem that we've also, not only we are in the UK, not only we are attempting to get through COVID, but we're also trying to get through our Brexit situation, which has caused huge disruption in our supply chains, massive disruption in our supply chain. Now, they are working really hard to fix it, but if you try and get something that's from the UK, you could be facing a delay, and we are certainly seeing delays in goods hitting our shelves, even foods, staple foods, food sources that we bring in from overseas are already being compromised by our new regime.
So
there are labor issues.
To the next. Go ahead, Dan.
There are labor issues as well. For example, we bought a new house. My wife wanted to remodel the kitchen. 10 months to get a new refrigerator, and then she wanted a new stove at 10 months as well. When looking into why, it turns out that there's a coating in the stove that's highly manual labor, and they got nobody to do it. Everybody's not working, whether it's for COVID or whether it's for whatever reason. People aren't working.
So with all this in mind, I mean, that's on, they say, the consumer side of things. The actual customer is seeing the impact by, lack of being able to get the stove or the car, whatever you're looking for. But on the business side of things, have you guys seen it impact your business's bottom line? Obviously, if you have low inventory because of either materials or labor or any of the 5 main buckets of cost, it's got to be impacting your bottom line. Would any of you guys like to discuss a little bit of how that's impacting you?
Jerry, I can say from our point of view that obviously we're a software company, so it doesn't affect us directly, but our clients are working in the large infrastructure projects and building projects, and they're having to make allowances for extra cost to get materials delivered quicker. They're having to pay premium premium rates if they want to get the materials ahead of someone else. The material resellers have got a bit of a leverage at the moment to charge surcharges and forcing not forcing, but the price of materials is definitely on the rise at the moment. I don't know if everyone else sees that.
Yeah, the cost
Now,
of plastic.
The increase in,
Go ahead.
go for it. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say the cost.
Sorry. Go ahead.
I mean, the cost of oil per barrel, for example, in the United States, it's changed because we were, producing oil domestically, and now we've, the new administration has brought in, a different perspective on this, which is definitely impacting, everything plastic, right? The majority of the plastics are petrochemical based. So the cost of oil has a direct, proportional relationship, not only with developing the plastics themselves, but also the transportation costs and everything that's oil related in the supply chain. So, to your point, yeah, it's affecting everything. And I think it affects everybody's bottom line. And, the goal is to always remain agile and try to, to offset those costs. But some of them, you're going to have to carry because it's managing the risk in the supply chain.
And I think most of the consumers expect to see and want to see the price not change, so therefore the margins are going to get smaller. Go ahead.
Oh, huge issues in the software and other labor-intensive businesses as well. We have people working for Galorath. In fact, two of my kids, one worked for Microsoft almost 2 years ago. He has met his team like 3 times. He's been working from home. Well, that's, in some ways it's more productive. In fact, there are studies saying that productivity hasn't gone down like we thought it would. In fact, in some ways it's more productive because people don't have to commute, they don't have to drive, but they work about the same number of hours, but over a longer time frame. So they might work 8 hours, but they do it over 10 because they take different kinds of lunches and breaks and things like that. But it's really the real difficulty is how do you build a team? We have individuals who've never met each other, who are good technically, but part of a team is the water cooler talk. It's the camaraderie, and that's going away. And I'm really worried about that. How do you get loyalty to a business when there's no human interaction?
And Dan, you read my mind. That's one of my later questions is how has COVID impacted, or, I shouldn't always say COVID, but how has this year impacted the total cost engineering teams that you guys deal with? Everything from working remotely, how do you collaborate? I was a cost engineer for 15 or more years, and I know working with the engineering teams and working with the finance teams and everybody, being there in person and being able to talk to somebody and communicate was much easier than it is via Zoom calls or anything else. But feel free to chime in.
Yeah, Jerry, what I'm seeing, not just through Aries, but what I'm seeing through the university is it's really hard to mentor people on abstract ideas through Zoom. So Zoom, if you're delivering something that's relatively logical and understandable and perhaps in someone else's experience, it's easy. When you're trying to bring some of the more abstract ideas that we deal with in cost estimating and some of the ideas around uncertainty, it's really hard to mentor people through Zoom. It's much easier with a whiteboard and people in the room. So, and I find from the work I do at the ACOST that bringing on apprentices, our members are really struggling to bring apprentices on. These young guys in their 18 or 21 or however old they are to come into the organization. These first-time workers, it's really, really tough to bring those on board.
This is Dale Martin with NOAA. I guess my experience is a little different, being new with NOAA since September, using a model called Seer for Space. Got a hold of the master equipment list that they had for a certain instrument. Got all their technical notes in a folder. They seem to be well organized. I was able to generate an estimate in 3 days, and basically just using standard operating procedures from the past with NASA and NOAA, estimated 80%, try to execute it 50%. I think everything with COVID and all those other things will fall well within that percentage, so to speak. But this is from kind of like a government perspective, not from a profit. So that perspective is a little bit different than what you guys are probably facing.
And that's a good thing to bring up. As we go through the rest of the questions, how can we, as business leaders, whatever, change or impact this? What suggestions do you have for the viewers to get over some of these hurdles? Andrew, you know, you're talking, it's hard to bring people aboard and hard to get some complex ideas across on Zoom. What suggestions would you have for our listeners?
So this is Christian. One comment I have is that we tend to underestimate inflation anyway. You look at official government indices that you look at with inflation, that tends to underestimate the actual amount of inflation. A better practice is if you have signed contracts and you have negotiations with contractors, use those as your inflation index, because those will be more realistic. And it's always better once you have some, it's hard to do when you don't have contracts in place, but there's just New York Times today reported that CPI increased 7% from last year. It's the biggest increase in quite some time. More than a decade. So we're underestimating inflation. We're going to probably even underestimate even more now, and we just have to try to look at what the true inflations are. If there's contracts in place, try to look at what the negotiated forward pricing agreements are, and use that instead of inflation indices that are published by the government, which always underestimate inflation, sometimes for political reasons.
When it comes to a shop situation, this is Doug Howard, by the way. I used to work for Lockheed Martin and run a production line. And for many of the production lines right now are suffering from people being out. And if the people that are out had somebody to fill their space that were cross-trained, then many of the production items can be ameliorated by cross-training. Now we run a software company. Most of the people here can do everybody else's job, and you don't see it as much. But in the manufacturing world, it seems to me that cross-training is going to have to be paramount for people to go forward to dampen the impact of COVID as we go forward.
Great input. Christian, you brought up the idea of inflation, and one of my other questions was, again, coming from my background, I did a lot of should costing, where we're predicting the cost of a future product. And that's based on a lot of, say, government data, benchmark data. There's a lot of people who use historical data from their purchasing. How would you suggest companies adjust their data for predictability in the future programs? Most people, and Keith, you can chime in, I think most people go 3, 4, 5 years out. They're trying to predict what it's going to cost, and they're basing that on, like I said, benchmark data. The benchmark data is kind of thrown out the window based on this year. So what is your suggestion on how people can improve their data for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years based on what's happening today?
Well, that's tough. As Yogi Berra said, predictions about the future, predictions are difficult, especially if they're about the future. We have to be careful about not trying to take what's happened in the last year or two and then extrapolate that out 5 years, because things might get back into balance. There are some things beyond COVID that Keith mentioned, for example, with the new administration. We're not drilling as much oil domestically as we had, so that's a separate impact from COVID on inflation. So there are some other structural factors, political factors that have increased inflation, causing prices to go up, and have increased inflation. But some of these things may balance out. You have a new administration potentially in a few years, and we may be drilling for oil again domestically. COVID may go away. We don't know. The Omicron variant supposedly is milder, but still a lot of people are being hospitalized. But it may, if the dominant variant becomes mild enough, it may become another common cold, and that may go away. Some of the stimulus and some of the child care credits will likely dissipate at some point, and that people will be more incentivized to work. People will not be sick with COVID and be missing work, so they'll be more productive. So productivity will increase. So some of these things could vanish in a couple of years. We just have to be careful about not taking just the last year or two and trying to say that's going to be the next 5 or 10 years going forward. We just need to think about it very carefully. There is a uncertainty and a risk. It is increasing right now, and we need to take that into account in our estimates and incorporate that in our uncertainty estimates. But we need to be careful about saying this is the new normal, because it may not be.
Christian, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. But one of the things that we're tracking here, again, not from areas, but from the university, is that the one thing I don't think will return back to pre-COVID levels is energy costs. I think we are all going to be stuck with much higher energy costs going forward for many reasons. One is obviously the cost of producing energy has gone up because of restrictions on them through government policy, but also I'm seeing a lot of impact because of green tariffs coming in and investments in renewables. Our companies are all going to bear the brunt of that. Now, I've got clients here that are thinking about going to fully green hosted environments, but it's almost a third more than putting the hosting into a mixed energy environment. So, but it seems to me we've got to decide what we're willing to incur as not just as individuals, but as organizations, what we're willing to incur, what will we fund in our products to improve the outcome for the environment, and what do we need to push back on and improve the supply chain for going forward? Because I don't think it's just COVID. I think you're right, Christian. I think there's quite a mixed bag of things going on at the moment. Some of them are being hid under the COVID blanket.
I think building off of both of those
Agreed.
I think building off of both of those comments, I would say that, the goal is not to overcompensate or overreact to what's going on, at the micro level, take a more, if you look at, your future cost estimates and how you're going to compensate for what happens. I always tell the people that work for me, you got to work from your knowns to your unknowns. And you got to have solid metrics to base your decision-making process. And things are going to fluctuate and change. I mean, that's part of the challenge and will always be the challenge no matter what the time or the industry. Whenever you're trying to place a cost to something that is dealing with a market that, is dealing with mood swings currently, right? So we adjust, quarterly, looking at materials, cost of oil and everything else to try to remain relevant. But as you start to forecast out, everybody's looking at ways to mitigate that risk, and so, you try to focus on the things that you can control, making sure that you've got, a really good understanding of, your critical path items and how they're going to be affected by the fluctuations in the market. And I think you identify those things, and if you got to associate risks to it, then that's a decision you got to make as an organization, right, as you make your business cases. The other thing, too, is working with the supply chain. There's a lot of give and take conversations throughout that as well, because you have to come to agreements on things where everybody's nervous. There's risk for everybody involved. And, from a supply chain standpoint, the supplier is looking to mitigate their risk. And I don't blame them. If I had a startup organization, or even if I was in business for a long time and I'm looking to deal with somebody, who's larger and more solvent, I would, also want to have them, take away my risk, but being cost conscious and also trying to drive, efficiencies in your processes and trying to, weed out, the things that, you have control over that are waste in your processes, and focusing on those, in the short term, and in the long term, trying to leverage, what you do know about your market and your critical path things, and keeping those right in front of you, I think is probably the best approach.
I'd like to expand on that.
I'm going to give it.
Sorry.
Go for it.
I'd like to expand on that a little bit. I mean, it's one thing to look internally to see what you're doing, and that's terrific, and you need to be able to do that. But often you can figure out what you need to do based on what the market is doing, how it's reacting to what it is that you're offering. And the market has a certain flow to it and certain limits that you can track. And it's important to know what variables that you're solving for. So, for example, our local restaurant thought it was solving for a capacity issue and had a certain arrangement of tables. And what they really wanted to solve for is a throughput. And so they had, during the times here out in California where we had limited spaces, they tried to solve for a maximum capacity in the restaurant by putting a bunch of large tables with spacing in between. And it turned out that most parties that go to a restaurant are smaller. In fact, there's 2.25 times more parties of 2 than there are parties of 4. So when they rearranged the seats, as we suggested, then their revenues went up. So the point is that you would need to look at how the market's reacting to it, in addition to everything else you're doing internally. I think that's going to be very huge going forward.
This is Ross.
I'm going to try to go for it, Ross, and I got something to chime in when you're done.
Sorry. I was just going to add on to what Keith was talking about as far as, I'll take it a step further and say that when dealing with suppliers and well-established supply chains where you have teaming agreements and you have other long-standing commitments, like we have in the aerospace and automotive industries, oftentimes that uncertainty can be shared. And depending upon the relationship, the sharing of uncertainty reduces the risk for both parties. We found that many of our long-term suppliers and partners, the level of collaboration, the level of supplier engagement has increased as a result of COVID, as we are both trying to mitigate these. And jointly, it helps us come up with better solutions. My group here as the prime is actually engaging and doing 3rd and 4th tier analysis for some of our key suppliers. So for many of these shops, they don't have their affordability teams or they don't have their own cost engineering teams to do that analysis. So we're actually picking up some of the workload to help them help us.
Great. So I want to take this straight to our listeners. Most of the people probably on this call are creating estimates or should cost estimates or just like I said, estimates. And it's all in the different buckets of cost. You've got labor, material, burden, and all that stuff. And I want to look at labor. If the local restaurant, using the previous example, is now paying $15, $20 an hour for their staff, everybody's labor rates are going to start ticking up. And like I said, I know Ross and Keith and some of you guys are predicting project costs in next 3, 4, 5 years. If you're using a database from like the Bureau of Labor Statistics or something like that to get labor rates, it's wrong because all of a sudden it just doubled, tripled. What are your suggestions for our listeners to improve the data that they're using in these assumptions and these estimates that they're predicting, 2, 3, 4 years out? That to me was one of my toughest parts of my job, was getting good data. And do you have any suggestions for our listeners on how to deal with this?
So I'll take this and I'll build off of what Ross said, because I think he touched on a key aspect of how we do business. Working to build relationships with the suppliers also opens the door for, frank and honest conversations wherever you can have them. And you try to work to build solutions together instead of, trying to put the onus of responsibility on one side of this. To answer your question about the labor, that's an area where you have to have those conversations with the supplier to understand what the true cost is. What are they paying today? And to your point about the Bureau of Labor and pulling, information from there in order to guide your decision-making process regionally, those are things you got to work with your suppliers to make sure that you fully comprehend.
So Jerry,
anyone else have a suggestion?
Yeah, Jerry, one of the things that we're doing is moving past the dollarized review and discussion and focusing on the labor hours themselves. So oftentimes our suppliers will push back if you attack quotes based upon the dollars, right? They get sensitive because there are a lot of factors beyond their control. So we tend to use software packages like Mr. Galorath's to better estimate the hours required to transform raw materials into finished goods and look for the inefficiencies based in hours as units as opposed to dollars. Those discussions tend to engage designers and industrial engineers while omitting the more sensitive finance communities.
That's a great approach. And it's really doing a sensitivity analysis kind of that tells you where you need to focus, I think. But go ahead, Professor.
Yeah, so the other thing I'm seeing, a lot of people are here are from the mechanical manufacturing industry, but a lot of the companies that are in their built environment, they don't actually have their own in-house teams anymore. They outsourced just about everybody they could. And what they're finding now is that engineers are in short supply, and people who can actually deliver added value on the ground are in short supply. And there's nowhere for them to go because they don't have anybody that they employ. So I think we're going to see a much greater level of employed individuals in our infrastructure companies rather than outsourcing them to their delivery partners. And I think that's a lesson for everyone. You must keep core capability in-house. You've got to keep core capability in-house and then work with partners where it makes sense to deliver, around the product that you're trying to put together. We've seen the subcontract world and the consulting world rates go up very heavily here, very heavily.
I agree. Kind of jumped around my order of questions, but they're all really great answers. And I've got one more question for you guys. Understanding everything we've talked about, all of this has to impact the timing of your projects. Do you have any suggestions on how our listeners can improve the timing or reduce the impact of, the environment that's going on right now? It's impacting their timing. How can they alleviate those impacts? Any suggestions for them on that?
Well, in software, for example, you build less stuff and you build the most important things and get that out, and then work with the reduced labors if you've got it. Same is true, I think, for many things. I went to a restaurant the other day, and they said, well, I'm sorry, it's only to go today because they didn't have enough people to serve food. I thought it was pretty clever. And there's lots of ways to deliver less, but give the customer generally what they want and keep on going.
Just on a lighter
Anybody
note,
else?
just on a lighter note, I think if we could get rid of Zoom and Teams and go-to meetings and allow us to get on with some work rather than being called into, it's very hard for me these days to say to someone, no, I'm on a client site, I can't actually do that today because people know you're working from home. So on a lighter side, I think we should just ban Zoom or whatever it is from at least one part of our day to give us some space to work in. But
then we wouldn't have met today.
This is at the end of my day. I'm not in my working day now. It's 6:30 and I'm getting ready for my first beer, I think, of the day. So but being serious for a moment, I think what I've seen is we've had to completely reevaluate how we deliver value to our clients. We used to install the software and then we'd go on site for 3 or 4 weeks and set stuff up and work with all the teams and get consensus and move our solutions forward. We can't do that. We now have to deliver everything remotely, from training to consulting to writing and completing new process diagrams to reporting back to senior management how the project's going. We've had to adapt very quickly, and we have become as a group far more efficient. Because we're not traveling, we're not trying to, what we're missing though is what Dan said earlier. We're missing the coffee machine chats and the water cooler chats where we get the kind of inside information from, people who know what's happening. We are more sanitized because we're on Zoom and people record almost every meeting, like we're recording this meeting. So people are less willing to speak up and say how they'd like things to be changed. So whilst it made us more efficient and we can get the job done still, I do worry that we're losing some of the nuances of helping people. I wonder if we're missing stuff, whatever that stuff might be, that we could have called and helped them with before. There is no relationship. You do not build good relationships with Zoom, really. That's my opinion.
So how do we suggest the viewers build those relationships in the current situation? Should they be doing team meetings, going to the local pub together and, getting to know each other or something? But, what suggestions can you have to the listeners that, hey, how do we get back to that knowing you can't get into the office in certain places.
I see Kelly Timko is on this call. She's a Galorath person. She's in charge of the Zoom-based water cooler chats. Kelly, can you speak for a minute and say how you did that?
Hi, sure. So what we do is twice a month we call it Zoom to the water cooler, and we just send an email out, to all of our staff and invite everyone to come and just have some social time with each other. We do for half an hour, and sometimes we have themed meets. Like we'll do, wear a crazy hat water cooler day, or for around the holidays we had wear your holiday hats, or just different things like that to be able to have an opportunity for our employees to sort of get together and have that time around the virtual water cooler, and it's been fun.
Andrew, you brought something up that I really hadn't been paying attention to until you just mentioned it a couple seconds ago. All these Zoom calls, I know they can be recorded. I've recorded them myself, but I guess I never put two and two together that that's probably preventing people from speaking their mind. I don't know if there's a way that you can make people more comfortable during these calls to prevent the recording or whatever, to get people to actually speak their mind. Any thoughts, Kelly, or anybody else?
You have one-on-one conversations with them. You give them an opportunity to talk to you one-on-one. Some people aren't comfortable, discussing certain topics out in the open, and you got to give them a release valve, if you will, for being able to share their opinion with you. Looking at the whole COVID situation and how this has affected things, I like to approach things very simply. And I like to use basic steps. So for me, it's a matter of, mapping the process, as simple as that sounds, looking at the gaps that we have in the information that we're providing people and looking for opportunities to improve. I think just like a person who has 5 senses and loses one, your other ones become heightened. I think when you look at communication in the same way, you also have to look at what you do have, and you got to leverage that to be able to, get the most bang for your buck, so to speak. I think everybody's really, I want to say, laser focused on trying to get the message across. And I think we can't lose touch with the human aspects that make us who we are. And just like I always say, you can't manage who you don't know. You have to get to know the people that work for you. And you also have to be willing to solicit the feedback that you need in order to be able to move things forward. And sometimes that feedback isn't positive, but it's necessary for you to be able to do what needs to be done.
Yeah, I wanted to just interject something here. So I think there's really two things going on here. One is, how can you establish and maintain rapport within your teams and within your company, and then also with customers. And those are kind of two different things. I do know that we have people at our company that used to fly before COVID like 200,000 miles a year, because it's really important to press the flesh and maintain those relationships. And it's often the difference between getting it and not getting it. So now we've adapted kind of to this new world, which at least for the time being is virtual based. Kelly has done a great job at our company in terms of allowing people to get to know each other through these, every couple of weeks, these water cooler sessions where we kind of have an unwritten rule that you're not allowed to talk work talk. so you have to get to know them. On my end of things, I manage the marketing teams all remotely. And actually that's been a benefit to me. I use Monday.com and Slack, a combination of that. And the benefit to me has been that I can work with teams in Europe. I can work with teams that are in opposite time zones of the world while I'm sleeping, to get more productivity done. And I'm not limited to the talent that is just local to the city. So it's been a great change. And I've been, I was doing that before the pandemic too, managing teams virtually. But I agree, there's no substitute for in-person stuff. One of the things that I also do is I tend to hire people who can operate autonomously, and that don't require a lot of handholding, because if you have to monitor them at all times or check in with them, then you've hired the wrong person. I believe firmly in that. And so that's worked out for me pretty well.
Adam, I think that's great for seasoned employees. My concern, the areas where I see a lot of challenge is these first-time employees. They really do need mentoring, and I like what Keith was saying. They need that one-to-one time. They need that time where they're allowed to make mistakes, and then you don't admonish them in front of the crowd. You bring them on by saying, what have you learned? And I think Keith's right. These one-to-one sessions with those young people that are our next generation is vital.
Yeah, I just to be clear, I also hire people that are younger and inexperienced. One of the things that I do is I offer, and I don't record the one-on-one sessions, by the way, because I think, as the gentleman pointed out, you get a different person when they know that it's being recorded. And I call these, I'll schedule like an Ask Me Anything session. And generally, because I've been doing marketing for 25 years or so, generally I'll schedule a session, once a week for half an hour, an hour. What's one new thing that they want to learn from me? And if we run out of topics, then I'll come up with some. But yeah, I think that's a great way to teach them and mentor them. How are we doing on time, Jerry? Are you done with your questions? Should we move to the audience Q&A?
That would be great. And I see we've got a couple, so go for it.
Okay. Let me just bring up that. So just a reminder to folks that we're going to be using, I saw a couple of questions come in on chat. We're going to be using the Q&A feature. Just as a reminder, that's not the raise hand feature. It's to the right of the raised hand feature called Q&A. Just type your question in there. And if you see somebody else's question and it's super important and you'd like it answered, just click the upvote and we'll prioritize them if we get a ton of questions. But the purpose of this session is to make this specifically relevant to you and your job and your projects and programs. And this is your opportunity to tap 9 or 10 brains at once. So I hope that we can get some good information coming in here. We do have a question coming in, and anybody from the panel would like to take it can take it, or we can get a couple of people. What new trends in technology do you see as a driver for increasing productivity or reducing cost? What new trends in technology do you see as a driver for increasing productivity, reducing cost?
I think it depends what market you're in, Adam. Okay. I think it depends what market you're in. In the built environment market, factory built panels and things are really increasing productivity massively, where they can control everything to a much better degree than building in situ. That's a good thing. And then in the mechanical engineering world, in the lower volume stuff, we're seeing a lot more people turning towards 3D printing and additive manufacturing techniques. Keith will be able to tell you better for the mass market, but certainly in the smaller markets, we're seeing people really looking hard at additive manufacturing as a way forward.
Yeah, for the aerospace industry, additive manufacturing is revolutionary.
Dan, do you have any comment on new trends in technology that you see as drivers for increasing productivity or reducing cost?
Well, again, I normally look at software and I see huge improvements over in tools. We've also got the things like we're using now, Slack and Zoom and those things, Microsoft Teams. All of them are going towards getting things done quicker. And then that's the technical side of it. Of course, there's the agile development, and agile works not just for software, but it works unless you're doing machining or something. Agile can work pretty well. Figure out what you're going to do it in bite-sized pieces, and keep on producing something that is usable at every stage. That's a better way to manage programs.
Good. Anybody have anything else to add?
Yeah, I think that, looking at technology in general and looking at the industry, and I know one of the one of the key things that was asked here was, how do you drive to a lower price point, right? So I think that the smartest people are the ones that take a look back and also employ some lateral thinking. Look for ways to do things that you can do in parallel, building off of the previous comment about Agile. A lot of the OEMs for sure, and I know we do it as well, we're working in an Agile environment. Everything is fluid. You're trying to do as many things in parallel as you can, and at the same time trying to mitigate risk, leverage opportunity, look for ways to gain efficiencies, looking at processes and leveraging areas of expertise, I think, is the cornerstone for good processes. I think that ends up becoming, the key takeaway is how do I use the new technology? It's not a matter of buying the newest widget. One of the lean principles is using, what's directly in front of you. What am I not utilizing that I currently have? And I think you got to look at, if you're doing any sort of costing, you got to look at everything that way. You got to look at what am I not using fully that I've already paid for. The technology is evolving so quickly. Some of these things, you mentioned 3D printing, good in some applications, other ones, it's not a best fit. So, you got to be smart about the technology and recognize the limitations, look for ways to employ it. Again, I say, look laterally, before you try to, to take, the time to invest in something that you may end up, becoming a boat anchor in your process. So you got to be careful with that.
Great points, Keith. We have another question here. And if anybody wants to, we can try it. Sometimes technology fails, and Zoom especially, but we do have the capability of bringing somebody on live to ask a question with their microphone. So if you're interested in doing that, just type your question in and indicate that you'd be willing to do that. The question is, what's your opinion on how COVID affects the cost of materials? Throughout our business, material pricing is inconsistent. A number of suppliers are increasing material pricing and attributing to COVID.
I think there's some truth in that. It's partly because people are out sick, or there's various disruptions. We've had a lot of government assistance, which has decreased incentive of some people to work. There is also other factors that are going on that are not exactly COVID. There are people are retiring earlier, people taking early retirements. So it's a mixed bag of things, as the panel has mentioned. It is interesting to see that. I went to a local barbecue restaurant to pick up some barbecue, and I saw that there was a COVID tax at the bottom on the receipt at the bottom.
Oh, dear.
I was less likely to go shop there just because, if they just priced it in, I probably would never have looked at it or noticed, but there's an extra $1 on the ticket because of COVID. And maybe they are having trouble getting people to work, and maybe their prices are going up. And don't just blame it on COVID. It does turn people off.
Interesting.
I say use the 5 whys to solve that problem. Because a lot of times,
I love that. 5 whys work everywhere.
When you start looking into it, a lot of times it's not warranted. So, there's also the opportunist that is born out of this adversity. So you can't always, it's not always what it appears to be. And, just because something gets repeated enough doesn't make it a truth. You have to, maintain your objectivity. Always, again, keep with the key basic things that end up, leading to success no matter what the time period. And asking those questions is very critical in understanding what you're dealing with. Don't take at face value what somebody gives you and think that this is what it actually is. Dig into it to make sure you fully comprehend it.
Good. Anybody have anything else to add?
I was going to say, for my business, it's pretty easy to get to the root of it all when it comes to raw material cost, because oftentimes these parts are all modeled, so we know the dimensions of the raw stock that they're starting with, particularly machine parts, right? So if they're artificially inflating their cost and they're trying to pin it on their suppliers, and their suppliers are charging more, I've sometimes gotten to the heart of that discussion quickly with you need a new supplier discussion.
Good. Thanks, Ross. We've got a couple more questions coming in. Keep them coming in, guys. And if any of you need to duck out early for a commitment, please look at the chat session. There's a link there to our 2-minute exit survey. we'll also send it out by email just to remind you, but important that we get some feedback so that we can make February's just as good as this one. So we have another question for the manufacturers on the panel. Do you think there will be a move to insource in manufacturing, going back to full technological cycle in-house? No, Ross is shaking his head. Can you expand on your head shake, Ross?
No, I don't think that, well, let me back up. I believe this is more temporary than permanent. I think we will overcome. And I think the direction that the industry that I'm familiar with has been moving towards specialization. So vertical integration to change course. There are just too many barriers at this point to restarting that manufacturing strategy.
Yeah, Ross, I think you'd lose a lot of innovation opportunity as well, because you, as you said, you are the OEM, you are responsible for the equipment or the vehicle or whatever, but you can't be a specialist in everything. I mean, where would this stop? Would you start writing your own software? Would you start building your own chipsets? I think vertical integration of a certain level of vertical is going to always be there, always.
Good. Anybody else want to take a stab at that? Okay, we have another question coming in regarding government contracts. And so most current government contracts have forward pricing rates that underestimate inflation. What can government contractors do to attract and retain good workers when their salary could fall behind relative to inflation? So there was just a piece about the IRS on the news yesterday, NBC News, about this, the shortages in staffs, the fact that they're back to where they were in the 1990s or 1970s. So what can government contractors do to attract and retain good workers when their salary could fall behind relative to inflation? Anybody want to tackle that one?
I guess first, I don't think it's just government. I think that's everybody, right?
Everybody, yeah.
But go ahead, Dan.
If you look at the top 10 reasons people work, salary in most professional cases isn't number one. Now, it's the quality of the work environment, the feeling of accomplishment, and things like that. So if people are treated well and feel like they're accomplishing, obviously people need to get enough money so that they can live. But money isn't everything.
It's also, I mean, it's a super competitive market right now, depending on, whether you're in engineering or marketing or one of the other verticals, super competitive for talent. I think Dan's spot on the money with that. But I also think that people need to be really creative with things to attract and retain, because one of the bigger things now is people hopping for 30% pay bumps at other places. So you really have to have a good culture in place, I think.
Yeah, Adam, the values, the numbers I looked up earlier on today is that the prediction is 40% of employees are likely to consider changing their job in 2022.
Wow.
And that's based on exactly what Dan said, based on culture, family time, and then salary. Salary wasn't even the top one. The culture was the top one, the organizational culture. And then family time. How would the job be flexible to give me family time? And then salary was number 3. Education came after that, and vacation and all the rest of that stuff. But the top 3 weren't what I expected. It was culture, then family time.
Yeah.
So I think that's what COVID has shown us. Yeah.
And I think that's a reflection of the age group. I think the younger generation is more towards that. Some of the older generation, myself included, I'm now retired, was working towards retirement, and it was salary, and it was pension, and it was all of that stuff for us older folks, including myself. Now it's a whole different ballgame.
Good. Anybody else have anything they want to add to that?
Well, I know at Galorath, we have employee stock, and that's a high motivator for people, I believe, from the money viewpoint. And then one of my kids works for Amazon, and they just drown him in stock. If he stays X amount of time, he gets Y amount of stock, and it's just amazing how much they're giving him in terms of stock. So his salary isn't anything to write home about, but his future is fantastic because of the stock options.
Good. Any other, I'm going to do we're coming up on the end of the hour here, and we appreciate that you took time out of your schedule, busy day, to learn something new today, and also appreciate the panelists taking time. These are kind of neat sessions because you don't have to fly to a different location and take 2 or 3 days off work to do this. We can just pop right into their offices. So thank you for joining us, and I'm going to give a last.
Hey, Andrew, Adam, I'm sorry, Adam. There's one question I see on my screen that we kind of addressed during our discussion. I just wanted to make sure that the person who asked it, we address it again, I guess. The question was, how should estimators account for increased inflation in the estimates, particularly for labor?
Yeah, I think we covered that, didn't we? I asked that.
Just wanted to make sure we got that one covered.
I think that I started part of that, but I think that the overall consensus too was to take a look outside your organization and look at trends. And if you're going to assign some risk to something to balance it out, make sure that you calculate that based off of not just your interior look, but you got to look exterior to understand how that, if the industry is trending in a certain direction, that you're compensating appropriately for it.
Good point.
I would just throw in that you need to make sure that labor is actually a cost driver, right? I mean, I'm just pick injection molding machine, right? If somebody is injection molding and they got a 30 cavity mold or even a 10 cavity mold, the labor content of that cost is minimal. So just because labor is increasing doesn't mean your price should increase. And that's one of the things that I've done in my past is taught that, if you got a 10%, most of you people on the call understand this, but if you get a 10% increase in, say, labor, it's not a 10% increase in the final cost. You need to look at the contribution of each one of these increases.
Yeah, it's all about the details, making sure that you understand it.
It's a good point, Jerry. And Keith, thank you. So I'm going to give one last call for questions. And while I am waiting to see if any additional ones pop in, I just want to remind the attendees in the chat window, if you launch that, we've got a link to our 2-minute exit survey. Each time we do this once a month, currently we give away a $100 Amazon gift card for 2 minutes of your time, or the chance to win a $100 Amazon gift card. And if you're a government employee and can't accept gifts, we have 4 or 5 charities to choose from that we can donate that money to. So please do take 2 minutes out of your day to do that. And next up, we have on February 16th is our next Lunch and Learn date at 10 a.m. Pacific, 1 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. UTC. It's on bias, your friend or foe. 2 ways bias is your friend and 5 ways bias is your foe, featuring Dan Galorath. Speaking, you can register for that at galorath.live. And without further ado, I'm going to say thank you again to our panel, and thank you for the attendees. And we will see you in February, hopefully. Video of this session, if you'd like to share it with your coworkers, it should be available on Friday of this week at galorath.live. We'll have a link to a YouTube video for you to share. Thanks for joining us. I'm going to leave this room open for another minute or two so folks can grab the link in the chat, and we'll see you in February.